I know he's not very old, but I hear well, I hear so I was at the
Because they don't have a signature. Because they don't have a signature down here. Until they get but every area has having to get your daughter bring her to school. And her friend has a different area. Which is on the signature test.
Good morning, everybody. What's your weight? So, July and Fisher.
Bluetooth is disconnected. Pairing.
Leading to it. I think this is a very timely topic. We have, usually 4 generations working in our workforce in the division. That means we have younger folks, sometimes called the millennials, who are supervising and managing people who are either called bloomers or some traditionals, and we have things the other way around. And I think the first conversations I heard about this topic must have been like 6, maybe 7 years ago, when new staff would come in and would plug in and they'd be up at their desks at the counter and they would have their earphones in and the manager supervisor would go, "What should we do? What should we do?" And of course, if you are supposed to be focusing on the counter, you're not listening to your at that time iPod. But I think that a lot of those issues have been resolved over time. New issues have arisen or new questions have arisen. So it's a very timely topic in my mind. Before we get started, though, we're going to do introductions. So we'll have department heads introduce new folks new to their positions. And I'll start by introducing Margaret Stone, who is the new library director, replacing Ken Behringer. And she comes from Hennepin County, Anoka County, and her most recent job before director was as a senior branch manager in the Dakota County Library System. So, welcome, Margaret, and you can introduce some folks on your team.
Becky Gonzalez from Anoka County. She is the new manager at the third plant in the zone. She comes with lots of supervisor experience and is doing it very well.
And you have one departure. Do you want to mention your departure?
So Ben Crafton is leaving to go out on his own, and he'll be with us on
So,
Congratulations on that Bitcoin.
yeah.
We have one new supervisor who has, I'm not sure you completed your first week as officially a supervisor. So you got her right into training, right out of the gate. Teresa Dalton is a new office management supervisor in our taxpayer services section. Teresa has been with Dakota County for a little over 13 years. It will be 14 years in August. She's worked in the taxpayer services section for 3 years, 2 years. I'm not good with numbers. I'm just. We want to welcome Teresa to this group, and hope she learns a great deal and stays with Dakota County for a long time.
I'm the supervisor at our Western Service Center here. Riley Haig is, she's been with the county almost, it's going to be almost 10 years. She just indicated to me, coming up here in 17. She started, they used to call it like a student program is what they used to call it. But so she started in Burnsville in 2007 and worked under Vicki Howard, and then was at school and did a few other things, and then came back full time and worked at our Robert Trail License Center. And just recently, as of December, joined the supervisor role with Jada Campbell, who's the manager now, as lots of Pat Stevens, who retired. So Riley brings a lot of energy, almost too much. I thought I had energy. I actually had to move out after that. I just couldn't take it. There's just so much energy there. So I'm actually back in Payson now, and we're going to let Riley and Jada take over the Western Service Center. So congratulations.
Teresa?
I have a couple people to introduce today. We have two new managers in our department, and Dan Festine, he's our manager of our systems area. He's been with us for 10 months, but unfortunately we were not here at the fall training, so I didn't have an opportunity to introduce him then. But Dan comes to us from Hennepin County, from the city of Fargo. So he works with us and manages the group that does a lot of our process improvement in the department. He comes with a lot of modeling experience, valuation modeling experience, GIS integration, so we have a lot of exciting things going on in that section for sure. That'll affect our department and many departments, hopefully. And then Andrea Fish comes to us just for 2 weeks. I guess we're at the end of your second week. She joined us last Monday. She comes to us from the Department of Revenue. And she was there for about 8 years and in an oversight capacity for assessors statewide. So where she was overseeing the work we did before, now she's one of us. So welcome.
And I'd like to introduce the county's new Diversity and Inclusion Administrator, Adriana Tamale-Smith. Do you want to say a few words about your background?
I'll just firstly, I'll say my name is spelled wrong there. It is Adriana, not Andriana, so thank you. Well, that was my sheet. That's okay. I got that luck from Victoria. This is my second week in Dakota County. I was born and raised in Twin Cities, but I just recently moved back after living 10 years abroad. So I'm kind of redefining the context here and getting the grips with diversity here in Dakota County and in the Twin Cities. But I have been doing diversity work for the last 10 years at a large community college, so I'm fairly experienced in what I'm doing, and I'm really excited to get started and get diving in with our IDLT team here at Dakota County. So, thank you.
And we've invited members of our diversity committee as well. I don't see Emmanuel Jean here. Dar Renner? No. Cindy Ludwig? Jason Rush?
I'm here, but I'm not on the committee anymore.
We're glad you're here.
Cheryl is here. Tammy Richardson, I know is here. And Russ, are you on the committee now?
No, I'm not, but I'm here.
Perhaps we need to update our committee. And Jamie Das. So with that, I will turn it over to Kathy. Could you introduce members of the training committee as well as our speaker?
Sure. Let's see here. Well, it's myself and Maureen, library right over there. Shannon Stone King right here. Jean is on there. Scott Lyons is in Florida, I understand. Annie Loken from PTNR. I think that's our little group. So thank you everyone for helping put this together. And some great help this morning. Thank you. And with that, I'd like to turn it over to our speaker, Andre Cohen. As we know, we've had him a couple of years ago, and I believe the library just had him in December, I believe. And we know that Andre is an energetic presenter, powerful communicator, and a dynamic teacher. He integrates his abilities as an improvisational comedian, large group facilitator, keynote speaker, and classroom teacher to captivate and educate his audience. Welcome again.
So I'll let you guys in on a joke. In that bio thing that you're supposed to do, there is a joke. Did anyone figure out what the joke was?
improvisational comedian, because people have such a difficult time saying that it's an inside joke. So I put that in there. So I want to say thank you so much for the opportunity to be with you. It is always great to be with my government comrades, so to speak. The needs that we have are very different than corporate America. The things that we produce are very different than the widgets that other places do. Our bottom lines are actually people's lives. And so I think it's important, particularly as supervisors, that we empower our folks to remember why they chose to be with county government. As we look at some of the stalemates that happen on the federal level, it becomes very clear to me that real power, real influence, real action happens at the local level. And so we can't underestimate the importance of the work that we do. And sometimes our staffs get confused. And so we have to help remind them that, number one, they have jobs because other people pay taxes for them to have jobs. And so those people need services. And so if they're not getting their services, then they're not getting their money's worth. And what happens when you don't get your money's worth at a restaurant? What do? No, somebody said no tip. Oh, you are the people. I tip anyway, right? No, you write a review. You stop going there, and ultimately, if they do that to enough people, then those things cease to exist, right? And so those are some important pieces. And it's very funny because I remember some of those early conversations about actually right around 2005. We started talking about this idea of generations in the workplace and why we have to have those conversations. And then at some point, the conversations have flipped, and we'll talk about the flipping of those conversations in our time together today. And it should be relatively clear that I have a PowerPoint presentation. And does everyone have handouts? Does everyone have a handout? Okay. So if you're at a table that doesn't have a handout, you may want to move to it. It's a hint that you may want to move to a table with a handout. It's a hint. But I do have handouts if folks are missing those. So I have my PowerPoint presentation. I have my handout. So I'm very well prepared for today's conversation. But as much as I have an agenda, and as much as I have something to talk about, I'm interested in what it is that you would like to discover, either about each other or about generations in the workplace. So what are some things that you are hoping that we will talk about or deal with in the time that we have? What are some things that you're hoping that we might talk about or deal with in the time that we have? Yes.
Raise comfort level of different generations with each other.
Okay. Right. Other folks? Yes.
Well, it seems like every generation has a strength or they obviously have different perspectives and how to draw those out so that you get a better ideas, better conversations.
Okay, so how to draw out those strengths. So raise comfort levels and draw out the strengths of each generation. So something else that people were hoping we would talk about or explore. Yes.
Communication is a big part of any interaction between different groups of people. So we can find strategies to improve communications, improve understanding.
Okay.
Speak the same language.
Now the same language is going to be different. Is going to be difficult because I'm still trying to understand what a turnip is. Some people know what I'm talking about. Yeah, no. Turn up. Well, that's what I'm saying, you know, is it food, is turn up a food, or is it a verb? Right? So, okay. That's a generational joke. So, yeah, so, yeah.
Nobody got it.
So I'll just let the cat out of the bag. So young people, when they're either excited or they want to have fun, or they think that something is really engaging, they say it's turn up. Yeah. For those of you who know what that means, did I explain that right? It's just, or what? I'm sorry. It is either turn up or it is turnt. Turnt. Oh, I know what you mean. So that's similar language, right? You know? So, other things.
I'm building on what Teresa said. If somebody's style doesn't match requirements of the job,
Yeah.
how do you find the language, the hook to explain it in a way that they'll understand
Yep.
the why they have to do what they need to do?
All right.
Yes. Well, some related sometimes is some cultures are very reluctant to talk with you or come to you as opposed to others that are very open to coming and talking with you.
Other, yes.
Because of diversity and globalization, and we also need to find a solution. This not only exists within our culture, referring to his example, that also have other culture, they perceive generational gaps way differently than, because I come from a different culture. When you're an elderly, you automatically assume a respect position, which doesn't apply in this culture as much as some Eastern culture.
Or it applies differently.
Or differently.
Differently in this culture, right?
So how do you deal with those kind of issues in the workplace?
Yeah.
As well too? Like, what is the notion and you have seen and so forth?
Yeah, no, I am so excited about what we get to talk about. This is super. Are there things that we should not talk about? Things that you say, you know, if we talk about this one more time, my head's going to explode.
Labels.
Yeah.
Labels. So what do you mean by labels?
Well, because we think you were born between this year and this year, therefore you must be X, Y, or Z.
Okay. Somebody said stereotypes, which I would say is a little bit different than labels, but we'll talk about stereotypes. But so the stereotyping of folks, right? So we'll talk about that. And what is a stereotype?
An assumption you make about somebody when you don't know them as an individual.
So exactly, it is an assumption, a huge generalization of lumping all people in and saying this will fix a situation because everybody falls into this kind of stuff. What do we know about the word all, particularly when we're in government? What do we know about the word all? Is the word all problematic? Yeah, why is it?
Saying never.
Right, yeah. Right. And it's funny, Sean Connery, and if people remember Sean Connery, one of the early James Bond, I think the only James Bond. So Sean Connery, he swore he's played James Bond again. And then he came back and made a movie, and guess what the title of the movie was? Never Say Never. So so that's it. So all and never, those absolute words are problematic because there are exceptions and there are different rules that sometimes apply. So so stereotypes suggest that all are this way, and we know that the nuances of human nature produces all sorts of variables of human behavior. Just look at your own siblings. Look at your own family members, same roof, same so-called mission, but very different expressions of those same ideas and values. All right. Okay, so no labels and no stereotypes. What else? All right, then we're on, party on. So we're going to turn up. So does everyone have something to write with? Does everyone have something to write with? So in your handout, right under the picture of this nice family, and we'll talk about this family in just a second. There's an activity that I want you to participate in called creating a genogram. A genogram is just a sophisticated or fancy way to talk about your family tree. And so what I'd like for you to do is, I'd like for you to think about 3 generations. And some of us have blended families, adopted families, or family members. But given I'll give you about 5 minutes to do this. I want you to do a rough draft of your family tree, starting with you. So if you can go back 3 generations or 3 levels, whatever that means for you, I'd like for you to create your family tree in about 5 minutes or so. All right? And if you don't know specific names, that's fine. You can put grandma, great-grandpa. You can give titles. All right? So it'll give you about 5 minutes to do that. I also want to add that if you get to a place where you don't know stuff, you can make it up. So feel free to make it up. All right, it looks like most people have established the branches of the tree. What I'd like for you to is I'd like for you to put a star next to someone in that family tree that was influential. So someone who's influential. So someone that people still talk about today, or that was dynamic in your family tree, and they could be notorious as well. So so that influence could be negative or positive. You decide, but star that individual or individuals that still get talked about, or that were important in that tree. So was everyone able, raise your hand if you were able to identify a person or a couple of people that had influence in that tree. All right, cool. What I'd like for you, for those people that you starred on the tree, I want you to put their, what year was their, what year or decade were they in their prime? And prime being however you see, now these are all your impressions, okay? So how you see, or what you've heard of the time when they were able to be most actionable in the world. When were they in their prime? So what decade, what years do you think it was? And you can guess, you don't have to be 100% accurate. We're asking for approximations. So when were they in their prime, most actionable in the world?
So the years or their age?
You can do either. You can do their age or their years or a time frame that they were most actionable in the world. When they're the most influential in the world. For example, between age 0 and 10, I wasn't as dynamic as you see today. So I'm currently, what year is this? I am 45. So one might say that my age being 45, I'm most actionable in the world. I'm most influential now I'm more influential now than I was in my 20s. One could argue that. So either what decade, what age, however you know how to answer that. All right, so what I'd like for you to do is spend just about 4 minutes having discussions at your table about what you discovered or the folks that you found on your family tree. All right, so at your table, just take about 4 minutes and talk about your family tree, what you discovered, who was influential, when was that, and what was their influence on your family tree.
I would say, like my mom and dad, so as far as
I know I started with like, but that probably they was their 40s, whereas I was there then, so I could work for myself in the 60s, which was why
Put down an to my
She was, my dad died at 36. She was 90 something, she died. In the 60s and 70s, she was 60s
I'm pretty sure my grandma she was 80 years old. That's okay.
My grandma, like in the 50s, we never was any period of time that she was about 40 years old. Yeah, it's hard to connect with that.
My grandpa, Dad said there was very yeah, I think he was caught up with some and
Those are the flowers.
yeah, he had a very colorful history. So I don't know, but I don't remember his father. He always had lots of money and had a great I think his time was important in all your stories. He's really huge. We're better.
In my heart, yeah.
For a lot of entrepreneurs, and that we're having children.
I'm not sure. You'd be lucky. Diane was like, stop.
They're from, I think my dad's from
Another was 4 boys. 4 boys. She was the one that kind of keeps together, and that's why I see it. It was always open. But I needed it then, so I did it. So later on, I
The tricky part is there's a bunch of like extended family that is that crazy mama thing. Who was like
the biggest thing I
that we want to talk about. 4 states.
you know.
Long run, but I remember even the day.
All right, if you can wrap up your conversations. If you can hear my voice, clap once. If you can hear my voice, clap twice. Thank you so much. So I'm curious as to things you either discovered about your own family as you're going through your family tree, or things you recognize about your family tree, or things that you learned from other people telling their story about their family tree. Anyone want to share any themes that you heard, or things that you thought about as you were participating in this activity? What kind of things came up for you? Yes.
Well, we discussed what do we mean by influence. Their most influential part of the world, or like their most influential part to me. Like my parents is when I was 0 to 10. That to me was their most influential part. But whether that was theirs.
Yeah. And whose perspective am I asking for? I'm asking for yours, right? So as you've heard stories or as you've experienced things, I think it's totally appropriate that you see your parents as being the most influential people in your family tree, because they certainly did do some things for you that you couldn't do for yourself, right? So yeah, so I think that's totally appropriate. Other folks, what did you think, or how the conversation come out for you?
Mostly, I gather from this table that people before them, like grandparents, or mainly that's what I heard. Same as applies for me. I still remember my grandfather. When I was a young boy that living in Bangladesh, I said that I would be going to the United States someday. Nobody believed me. They didn't even think it was possible because internet wasn't there. You can't just look in where is US and things like that. And he believed me because he was a pre-British time soldier, so he remembered, it is possible to go to a different country.
Yeah.
Things like that. He encouraged me.
Yeah.
And I still remember that. And I even served in the U.S. Army, not even knowing, he never told me go join the military. And I have no idea why I did that, but I know I wanted to do something like that.
Yeah.
So, and as you asked me today, it's just dawned to me that maybe that is why I got the answer. I had no idea that he did the same thing, one generation before.
Yeah. So, and it's interesting. Has anyone else had a grandparent that's really supportive of you when other folks weren't necessarily supportive of you, or they understood you differently than other folks? Anyone have that grandparent? Right. Is anyone that grandparent? Yeah. Someone said, I will be after today. Yeah, no, it's funny. So on my blog, I wrote all this stuff, and I'm like, I'm pontificating on, on my brilliance and, all of my observations of the world. And so my parents are divorced, and so my mom tells me, she said, did you get your dad's book? And I said, no. I said, I didn't even know he wrote a book. She said, yeah, he wrote a book. And so I went to Amazon, and I bought a couple of copies, trying to be supportive. And so, lo and behold, I'm reading his book, and all the stuff that I thought was my brilliance was his brilliance. So somehow, we didn't talk about that, but those things kind of transmit from generation to generation. Other things that you noticed, or conversations that came up about.
I found that I had a hard time deciding any one person because as I started looking at all of my family members, they all had really strong things about their lives that were worth acknowledging.
Yeah.
And so it was hard to say, this is the one that I should talk about over this one.
Yeah.
So that was a little difficult.
So what were some of the things that made or a couple of people that made, really, so what were a couple of things that made it difficult or attributes that made it difficult to say one person or another?
Well, each of them had their own hard road to hoe, and they struggled through their, what they were given in their life as best they could. My one grandmother, she and my grandfather divorced very early in a time when divorce was not a thing, and she was a maid for her whole life and had 3 kids and no support from her ex-husband, and so that was hard for her. And my father's whole life was sort of built around trying to help support her and his 2 sisters. So he was, working early and always sending money, to his mom, and so just stuff like that throughout the whole family tree, where this one's got this problem and they need to work through it, and this one's got this problem and they need to find a way. But it's always, I think for my family, it always comes down to you get up in the morning and you go to work and you do your job and you make sure you get that. You make sure you do that.
And have you done that?
I have.
And where do you think you get that from?
I get that from both sides of my family. I really do. Yeah. But I can't figure out why I haven't been able to pass that down to my daughter.
Here's the interesting thing. I would imagine that your father has some questions about why you're not doing it just like he did it.
Right.
Grandmother would say, son, how come you're not doing it just like I did it? Right. What do you think is, and I want to say thank you so much for sharing very personal things with people that you work with, or not sharing those things, right? So however you were able to share, I appreciate that, and thank you for trusting the people around the table to keep that information trusted, right? So why do you think we started off the session with this particular activity?
To understand the value of the people, like the generation before us.
Okay.
How they influenced our life or not influenced our life, either way.
Yep, so how the generation before us influenced our lives or didn't influence our lives. What else? What else might be? Yes?
You have the opportunity to influence generations following you.
You have the opportunity to influence generations that follow you. What else? Yes?
And the generations that follow us have the opportunity to influence us.
Yeah, and we are also influenced by the generations that follow, right? One of the things that sometimes, if we're going to talk about this idea of generations, and why do you think I had you talk about a time frame associated with people's influence? Either a decade or an age. Why do you think I had you do that? Why was that important to at least recognize as it related to those people and their influence?
To recognize that their influence is relational to you, and it's not necessarily related to the prime of their life. Although that's what some people may say is the influential period.
Yeah. So it could be relational to you. What else? Yes.
Well, the world that they were living in influenced them and actually made them who they are.
The world that they were living in influenced them and made them who they were. Context is everything. Everything. I love my grandmother. Loved her. She, her birthday was 7 days before my, 2 weeks. So she was, her birthday was October 14th, and mine was October 30th. Loved my grandmother. Loved her, loved her, loved her, loved her. Misunderstood her for most of my life. Misunderstood her. Loved her because she would play games, and she did puzzles with us, and Scrabble was one of her favorite games, Yahtzee. We would always play Yahtzee. And she had all these trophies around the house. And I never understood these trophies because some of them were statues of these people holding a ball in the back. So she had all these bowling trophies, and she had all these, she was a mistress. She was someone's mistress. And I think his name was Toast. She was a toast mistress. Right? So she had these things. But as a kid, you don't know what that stuff is. You don't really understand what that is. And so, when I think about my speaking and my ability to articulate myself in a particular kind of way, given my audience, I hearken back to her. But I didn't know that. That wasn't something that was cognitive for me. And she went misunderstood. I thought my grandmother was nasty. Like, as much as I loved her, I did not like eating her food. Because she would do weird stuff with the food. For example, she loved having tea and toast for breakfast. That was her thing. And she would do something that I don't see many people do today, which she would actually use the saucer. And so she would put the saucer on top to make sure that the tea was hot, and then she flip the saucer under the cup to make sure. So she actually used the saucer. She taught us how to use saucers and whatnot. And so I remember one time I was over for, and we would spend Saturday night with her and go, because we would go over our Sunday school lesson Saturday night. So we were ready for Sunday school Sunday morning. And so my grandmother would do all these things, and she'd make breakfast for us that morning. And I remember this very distinctly because my brother and I were like, so she opens up the jar of jam and there's mold in the jam. So my grandmother takes a spoon, scoops out the moldy jam, and then serves the rest of the jam. And my brother and I, she would also make us sandwiches, and she would make some interesting sandwiches. Like one of the sandwiches she made us was a peanut butter, jelly, and Braunschweiger sandwich. Oh. You guys know Braunschweiger? Oh, right? So it's like it's like a cheap bologna, liver pate kind of thing, right? Interesting stuff. She would cut the mold off of onions and cheeses and serve it to us, and I thought she was nasty. At her funeral, so she was number one of 6 siblings. So her youngest sister gets up and starts, at her funeral, mind you, starts telling stories about how they survived in the Great Depression. And then at her death, I go, oh, that's why, ... That's why, ... My grandmother would save newspapers, and she'd tie them in bundles and stack them, and I'm not exactly sure what we were supposed to do with these newspapers, but she would make us bundle the newspapers and put them in the garage. I can only imagine that at some point they would sell those when she was a kid or blah, 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 but she would make us do that because that's what she did to survive. Context is everything. It's everything. A lot of, how many people have been to a cultural competence training? Right? Or some of those diversity trainings and that kind of thing. One of the things that where those things fall short is that although we're talking about the culture, we never spend enough time talking about the context that the culture comes out of. We don't talk about that. So when we start talking about this idea of generations, we have to recognize that each of these generations come out of a context. And the world required certain things out of them, and they delivered. They delivered. Context. So my grandfather was born in Memphis, Tennessee, and his father was born in Memphis, Tennessee. And in Memphis, Tennessee, in 1910, 1920s, it was really, pretty tough for African American in Tennessee. And so my grandfather's father became a gambler, a numbers runner. It was the easiest thing to do, and I'm sure he had a straight job, but he's the stories that they tell is about his numbers running. Now it was sort of kind of organized crime, but not organized crime as we kind of think about it, because they had an organization. So they did. We had cleaners, which was part of the front of the house, if you will. We did cobblers, people who stitch and make shoes. So that stuff was part of the front of the house. But they also did this gambling thing. And so numbers runners, gambling, all that kind of stuff. And so he was really good at it. He was good. He was infamous for his gambling. And he got the reputation, or his nickname became Doc, short for doctor. So they called him Doc. Now, why would they call a gambler doctor? Yes.
Did he fix the numbers?
Did he? Oh, wait, maybe that's it too, right? Maybe he fixed the numbers, right? Why else would they call him Doc?
Sign of respect.
A sign of respect. Why? Why a sign of respect?
Doctors are educated.
Doctors are educated, they're well respected, they're very well liked in the communities that they're in. So at that time, the best thing you could be in the community was a doctor. So they called him Doc. Fast forward, my dad's generation, late 60s, early 70s. People were struggling to be called what? Because my grandfather, I didn't put that in here, but my grandfather was called what? By people who oftentimes were younger than him, did not have as much responsibility as him. What were they called? What was he called?
Friends.
Friends?
Gramps.
Gramps.
Old man.
Old man. So my grandfather, his parents named him J.W. And, put man right here. So they called him J.W. and his name was J.W. His legal name was J.W. But they changed it because somebody said, he's too pretty to have a name, he's too smart to just have a name that's initials. So they decided to name him John Wesley. Now, I don't know if you know who John Wesley is, but my people were good Methodists, right? And what do we know about John Wesley as it might relate to African Americans in the early part of the 1900s? Why might they revere John Wesley?
Because he wasn't a Baptist?
Because he wasn't a Baptist? John Wesley was an abolitionist, and he was a Methodist, which is why a number of African Americans are Methodists. Because the Methodists were the first and the most out, particularly in the Midwest, they were the most out front about abolition. Right? So we have the Quakers on the East Coast, and we have Quakers here, we have Quaker communities here. But context is everything. Context is everything. So John Wesley. Now, one of the things that was real interesting for my grandfather is that people could not pronounce John. It was too complicated for them. So they called my grandfather Boyd. They call my grandfather Boy. Why? Context. So my father comes along, and in 1968, he witnesses something that would just rocked his world. And what event in April of 1968 could have rocked my father's world? The assassination of Dr. King. My dad turns 18 and he says to my grandfather, I want to do something about that. So my father joins the Black Panthers. Now, I don't know what you know about Black Panthers or what you think you know about Black Panthers, but primarily they were a political party. And their aim was to get people out of poverty, and specifically black people out of poverty. And so my father became a Black Panther. And so part of his mandate was that the slang word that they would use to relate to each other was man. What's up, my man? What's up, man? How you doing, man? Right? So that was their slang term. Context is everything. Their fight was to be seen as men because their fathers were seen as boys. So fast forward. So the doctor was the most respected person in the community. People started calling my grandfather boy. My father strives to be recognized as a man. And now my generation. Sagging pants, hammer time. Right? We also would wear our clothes backwards for crisscross. Remember, they make you jump. Right? Yeah. And so I found it interesting that we would say to each other as a term of endearment, "What's up, pimp?" Dude, that was pimp. Hey, pimp my ride. Anybody heard any of those things? So in my community, why are we calling each other pimp? Context is everything. Why was my grandfather the gambler, my great-grandfather the gambler, considered a doctor? Because what? Because of context. That was the best person in the community. In the 1980s, in terms of 1980s, what's going on with our urban communities? Where are the doctors? Where are the lawyers? They live in my urban community. They don't live where I live. They live in suburbia, where all successful people live. So who's left? Who's the most successful person in the community that's left? In my community, I'm not saying this is for everybody, I'm saying for my community. It was the pimp. Big rims, loud cars, the girls, followed it, all that kind of stuff. So what saddens me now, because context is everything, and as I look at how people related to themselves, particularly in the communities that I've been involved with, I now hear something that's very disturbing to me. Very disturbing. I heard a group of kids say, "Hey man, that was so beast. You are a beast." Anyone heard young people refer to that or heard that in public pop culture? And what do they mean by that when they say that?
Unafraid.
Unafraid. Fierce. What's that?
Marshall and Lynch.
Yeah. What's the problem with someone who has no fear?
They'll do anything.
They will do anything. What do beasts do? Whatever they want to do. And how do these kids act? However they want.
Like a beast.
What's that?
Like beast.
Like beasts. Not accountable to anyone. I'm living my own truth. I do what malarkey. But if we don't take control of the context, the culture will continually have people responding to this, right? So context is everything. So we are constantly learning to adapt to context. Constantly learning to adapt to context. What is happening with context as we're adapting to it?
Changing.
It's changing. So context is time, the use of space, and geography. That is context. And those things are constantly changing. Which means there's a direct ratio between context and culture. And there are a number of different ways to identify or talk about culture, but I'd like for you to at least write this one down. If you could just write this down on that second page, because this will become important as we look at the generation piece. And we'll define culture for the purposes of this particular exercise as an adaptation to the context. So culture is the adaptation to the context. So when I say adaptation, what do I mean? What could be attached to adaptation? What other words could go along with adaptation?
Change.
Change to the context. What else?
Reactions.
Reactions to the context. What else?
Evolution.
Evolution to the context, right? Coping mechanisms to the context.
Flexibility.
Flexibility to the context, right? So all human behavior is goal directed, and its goal is to adapt to the context, given some specific things. And we'll talk about those specific things in just a bit. All right? Any questions, comments, observations so far? So now when we start talking about these generations, what's the thing that we have to keep in mind? The context by which they come out of. The context by which they come out of. I think it's interesting that when I taught middle school and high school, I'd ask my Native American kids about their culture. Boom, they could tell me something. I asked my Hmong kids. Boom, my Southeast Asian kids, I'd ask them, and boom, they would tell me. They could tell me things about their culture. The African American kids, the Hispanic or Latino kids, I can ask them. The Hmong kids, I could ask them. The East African kids, the West African kids, I could ask them. But then when I asked my white students about their culture, they would say, I'm American. The second thing they would say is, I don't have a culture. Do they have a culture?
Majority culture.
It may be called the majority of things, but they do have a culture. And why do they have a culture? Because they come out of a context. Wherever there is context, there will always be culture. And the culture is the adaptation. So if I don't understand the culture, I might need to look at the context. Brooklyn Park. They had a problem. The toilets were being ripped off the wall at an alarming rate in the boys' bathroom. Toilets just ripped off the wall. And they kept replacing the toilets, and as soon as they would replace the toilets, they'd be ripped off the wall again. So they started asking some questions after they had replaced a few toilets. They started asking questions, and guess what they found out? Because they were giving kids reprimands and detentions and charging parents for kids' destructions of property. But when they started asking questions, guess what they found out? Because they didn't understand the behaviors. They found out that the kids who were ripping the toilets off the wall came from refugee camps where you don't sit on toilets. You squat on them. Whether those toilets are on the ground or connected to the wall. Once they understood the context that these behaviors came from, guess what they started doing? Educating folks about how things are done and why it's bad to do those things or different ways of doing things. Once they understood the context by which the kids were coming from, they could understand the culture by which they were operating in. So context is everything. So when we start talking about these generations, so let's go to the second page. The greatest generation. What context is the greatest generation coming out of? What's one of the major influences of that greatest generation? World War II and the Great Depression. The combination of those two things makes for some very interesting individuals, doesn't it? The Great Depression makes people do what? Hoard. We call it hoarding. They would call it waiting to recycle stuff. So my great-grandfather lived with us, and he would take all of the little pieces of soap, and he put them in a gallon jug, and then he would take all the little pieces, and then he would form, after a while, he'd form a whole new bar of soap. We thought that was weird, but it's actually quite smart, because what do? You do not want to wash with that little piece of soap. Right? What does it also say? So if World War II was a huge influence and everyone was a part of the war machine, my grandmother was actually, as a part of the Korean conflict, she got a chance to work in a GE factory in Cincinnati, Ohio, on an assembly line. Right? That was powerful because she was relegated to cleaning houses before. So at any rate, so if World War II is impactful, what was needed, what was required for World War II from people? Sacrifice, discipline, order. Right? So we start moving into the 1950s. What were the 1950s like? What's that? Booming. It was booming. Right? We had growth and prosperity because we had order. We had order. But then what did the children of that order suggest about the order itself? I don't know if you ever saw shows from the 50s, but men and women never slept in the same bed on the shows.
Yeah.
So you're watching these shows, but then you see what happens with your own parents, and what are you saying about this order, about the rigidity of this order? What did their kids say? Forget it. Burn the bras, burn the conventions, because this is fake. The order that you have is artificial and fake. So we're going to introduce something new. We're going to rebel. So then those folks have kids, and what do they think about discipline? What do the baby boomers think about discipline?
Oh, there is none.
There is none. And then you end up with people like me. And my parents didn't discipline me. How are you going to discipline me? Right? And then folks like me end up having children, and what do those children do? They question authority at every turn because I question authority. And I taught them to question authority because you can't trust the man. Right? And so as we look at these generations, the greatest generations, the baby boomers, the Gen Xers, the Gen Yers, and now we have this, kind of Generation X, if you will, who grew up with computers. It's so funny, I had a VHS tape that I took to, and they were savvy, but they were joking with me. I said, does anybody know what this is? And they were like, no. Right? But there are actually little children now who don't know what a VHS tape is, don't know what a cassette tape is. I lived and died by cassette tapes. I learned how to splice them and put them back together and cut out all sorts of stuff, right? And so there are young people who grow up with technology. And so I mentioned earlier that there's been somewhat of a flip since 2005. Because 2005, people were concerned with the Generation Xers and Generation Yers coming into the workforce. But now and it's funny because I was just trying to think about some of my colleagues at Anoka County, because I was the affirmative action officer at Anoka County, and a number of those folks have all retired. I was asking somebody, do you know so-and-so? Do you know so-and-so? They're like, no, they're retired. The library director at Anoka County, one of my greatest allies and friends, just retired. And so now it's like a totally different place. Because now we have Gen Xers and Gen Yers as supervisors and managers, where before we were wondering how we could work with them. And now we're in a position where they need to figure out how to work with the rest of us. And so we'll spend some time talking about that. So before we get into that next part, let's take a 4-minute break, if you don't mind. We'll take a 4-minute break. We'll move around a little bit, and then we'll come back. 25 minutes.
This way, every person has I don't think there's more. Great time. I think I need to pump it up on Twitter and see the article. Website. Yeah, we had 213 hours last year, which was like an increase.
So far.
At the beginning and then rush to get something. So I'm not really. I think stretch
Andre, before you were in the county, I just came from there.
Yes, yes, I was there until 2006. Yeah, so I was there
I love working there, but I lived down
I did,
Keep in mind that when it comes to money, they are typically very good favors and are well meant to pay cash. Our baby boomers have more of them.
All right. So I want to say thank you so much. Hopefully folks got their needs met. I'm going to do a couple more lecture pieces, and then we'll get into our PowerPoint presentation. And I will tell you that there are, if I'm not mistaken, about 79 slides. It is not my plan to go through all 79 slides, but you will have access to them for your own development. Right? So I'll make sure that you have access to those for your own development. So context is everything. If you don't understand the context, then you certainly don't understand people's cultures, and then you don't understand their behaviors as they try to adapt to their context. So I want to talk a little bit more about this idea of culture as it relates to context. So we just identified that culture is an adaptation to context. I want to drill down a little bit more on this idea of culture so that as we look at these generations, we can understand some of their motivations. All right? So there are things in culture that are very visible, things that you can see and things that you can't see. What are some examples of things that you can see about a culture? How they dress. Feel free just to shout out.
Rituals. Rituals.
What they eat. What else? Music. How they demonstrate respect. What else?
Behavior.
Behavior. Language.
And that. Cell phone vibrated.
Right, cell phones. Right, cell phones. Right, and there are many other things, right? So how people dance, the dialect that they use. I was just in Seattle, and they're like really weird there. You know, and they say I talk funny with an accent, which is interesting. So there are things that you can see, and we'll call those things artifacts. So artifacts are things that you can see about a culture. And when we think about generations, there are some artifacts that are associated with each one of those generations, right? So for my generation, you know, of the 80s, if not, one might say that the VHS is the pinnacle of our, you know, as an iconic image for us. For other generations, you can think of icons that when you see them, they make you think about that period of time or that group of people, right? So artifacts. So those are the things that you can see. There are also things that you can't see. And what are some things that you can only know if you're a part of that culture? What are things that you only know if you're a part of that culture? Yes?
Connotations of words.
Okay. So connotations of words. Why? Why? Values. What else?
Their belief system.
Belief system. How many people recognize that men and women, anyone ever gone to a stadium type event or a large type of event and they have an intermission and women go to the restroom and men go to the restroom? Have you noticed that the women's line is usually longer? I figured out why. Women are writing letters.
Wrong.
So what are those little mailboxes for? Oh, just joking, just joking. Right? But there are things, and so most of the men have no idea what I just was talking about. Right? Because there are only certain things that you can get access to, right? If you're in that culture. And I would say things like the belief systems include spirituality, gender roles, all those kinds of things. So there are things that you can see and things that you can't see. And these things that you can't see, we'll refer to the whole group as values. So when I started thinking about this idea of context and culture, I went to agronomy. I went to a living metaphor that could help me explain some of these concepts. And so I went to the carrot. So I like this, what's up, Doc? And so there are two parts to the carrot. There is the top part. Now, what do you call that? What is the name for that? Anybody have a name for that? The greens. Okay, so we'll call this the greens, and we'll call this, as my grandmother would say, the root, right? Or the root, right? So there's a symbiotic relationship between these two things. And what is the symbiotic relation? What do each of these things do for the other? So they feed each other. How? How does that happen?
If the greens don't get sunlight and water, the root doesn't develop.
So the green gets the sunlight and it feeds the root. And what does the roots do for the greens?
The water and nutrients.
It takes the nutrients from the ground and provides it to the greens. Symbiotic relationship. Can they survive without each other? It's questionable. Maybe the root can spark up a new green, but the green that certainly is necessary to the development of that carrot. Right? Now, I find it interesting that when we talk about this idea of culture, there are things that we can see. Let's refer to the fact, let's call the greens artifacts. And let's call the root values. So when I see artifacts, what are those manifestations of? Values. So when I see artifacts, when I see the way people dress, that is a statement of values. A statement of values. When I see how people act, what is that a statement of? Values. Now, I did a training over at the Wellstone Center yesterday, and we were talking about, we got to this part, and so somebody asked me about sagging pants. They said, sagging pants. They said that's dumb. Sagging pants are dumb. Pull up your sagging pants. You tell people to pull up their sagging pants, and it is an artifact that is a statement of value. What if I told you your values were dumb? What would you think about me? Would you be willing to comply, to help me, to work on a project if I thought your values were dumb? No. Does it matter what I think about your values, whether you hold them or not? It doesn't matter. You have your values given the context that you come out of. So what about the pulling up your pants thing? I was the pull up your pants police. I gave people tickets for not pulling up their pants. I talked to strangers and be like, and here's the weird thing, people would actually do it. My students got tired of me saying that, particularly in the high school. And so I said, pull up your pants, and they wouldn't pull up their pants, they'd pull down their shirt. They pull down their shirt. What I had to teach my students was that their artifacts were fine. Their values were fine. But they needed to know what context they were in. Context is everything. Stand and Deliver. Has anyone seen that movie with John Amos? Yes. So he's a teacher in a tough neighborhood, and he has this shining star of a student that is crusted with all this coal around it, right? And so he sees the student, he invests in the student, and so the student comes to him one day and he says, "This is a bad impression." He says, "Yo, teach, I need a set of school books." And the teacher's like, "What are you talking about, school books?" He said, "I got a set of books for home, and now I need a set of books for school." Now this really baffled the teacher because he's like, "Why are you asking for more books when you already have books?" And so he looks at the teacher and he says, "I can't be seen carrying no books in my neighborhood." So guess what the teacher did? He got him some school books. Context is everything. So what I told my students, I said, there are times when you need to have your pants pulled down. It's fact of life. But there are other times that you need to pull your pants up so that you can get the things that you want out of life. Context. I know some of you turn up with your friends differently than you turn up at work. Right? Context. Context is everything. So the other thing about this, as we were talking about that, so I want you to think about that. So cell phones is a statement of values. Timeliness is a statement of values. Orderliness is a statement of values. So we need to understand the values, and we also need to understand how those things relate to the context. Now, what I will say is that people may have different values. So this is a saguaro cactus. And I think I have the root system correct, right? So it's a shallow root system. Other people, okay, so yes, I got a nod. So it's a shallow root system. Now the values of these two things may be different, but their function is the same. Their function is the same. So we may, in fact, have values that may look very different, but the function of those values is the same. Does that make sense? All right, cool. Because people brought up, they said, well, what about, and I love when people bring extreme examples to me that so what about, ISIS? Do we have the same values? I said, I don't know, because I haven't seen their mission statement. I've only looked at their behavior, right? But what I would say is, even if those values may differ, the function of those values is the same. All right? So let's go to...
Do they deserve the same respect? Just because the function is the same, I mean, two cars can get from point A to point B, the Mercedes-Benz is a lot nicer than a Yugo, most people would agree.
To who?
Let's say the majority of people would probably say...
To who? No! To you! Because I think that a BMW is an excellent, the most excellent driving machine.
Correct, but that wasn't the choice. Half of those routes, would you rather the parrot or the cat?
Half of these people don't know what a Yugo is, okay? No, so you know, and it's funny because you do offer us a false choice, right? A false choice. A cactus survives in a particular context for a particular reason. So I have to understand the context by which those things are created, right? Because, and I'm not supporting this, but I want to just, so using that as an extreme example. Some folks see them as freedom fighters. We might not necessarily see that or understand it, but some people do. Another example of this kind of principle. So, because I'm going to get to your question. So, Black Lives Matter. Mall of America. Protest 2 years ago. Do you guys remember that in the news? Anybody heard about that? So Black Lives Matter. They so thousands of people, and it was roughly around 2,000 people or so, but descend on the rotunda, and in the mall in the city of Bloomington hire police and sheriffs from all over to kind of, we're gonna, right? So they everybody is posturing in this particular event. And so there's no membership roles for Black Lives Matter or anything like that. So so I'm still talking about this, and I'm still talking about generations, so I don't want to get stuff mixed up. So they decide that there are 11 people that they're going to prosecute for this, or hold accountable, is the words of the city attorney. Hold people accountable to this, because civil disobedience. Anyway, so I go to the meeting, and the meeting is like on January 13th or like the 16th, something like that. Well, so they're going to decide to prosecute these folks, right? And they're taking public comment. So people came to talk and say why they should or shouldn't, and all this kind of stuff. And so before the meeting starts, the mayor gets up, and with the head of and I'm only saying this because they did it, the head of the Human Rights Commission stands there with the mayor, and the Human Rights Commission receives a proclamation from the mayor stating, in honor of Dr. King's holiday, we mark this day in our support of everything that Dr. King stood for. Context is everything. The Black Lives Matter people who were at the mall protesting, guess where they got the idea of protesting? From Dr. King! It's right out of the playbook! Anybody seen Selma, right? They caused disruption. They stopped people from getting lattes. There weren't lattes back then, but right? So context is everything. And so when we take things out of context, that's when we can contort things and make them bad or make them good or whatever, but context is everything. So when we talk about this idea of erasures, I have a short video clip that I want to show that talks more about the generations, and then I'm going to fast forward through some stuff so that we can get to doing some role plays, or at least situations that we can work through as supervisors. All right? So, it timed out. And and I brought up the Black Lives Matter thing because sometimes people say, well, I don't understand everything that they're doing. But guess what? I don't have to. It doesn't stop them from doing it. But what I do know is that something needs to change. And change is uncomfortable. Anyone had a child? It's uncomfortable. They wreck your life. No, they do. You got stuff ordered. You got stuff in the right places. They come in and taking stuff and moving stuff around. Wreck your life. but it's the best wrecking ball I've ever had. Cool. So that's coming up. So let's do this. Oh, here we go. There's 78 slides, and we're not going to get through all of them.
Let's further explore basic characteristics from each generation, from personal and lifestyle traits to workplace characteristics, to help us better understand who we are and how we are different.
Is it too loud?
5 personal and lifestyle characteristics we will explore include core values, family, education, communication and media, and dealing with money. To begin, our traditionalists have strong core values for discipline and respecting authority. They come from the traditional families, and if they received an education, that was definitely not the norm. Education was more of a dream to many traditionalists. From a communication standpoint, they prefer one-on-one communication, or a formal memo, for example. And keep in mind, they grew up on a rotary phone from a communication standpoint. And when it comes to money, they are typically very good savers and are well known to pay cash. Our baby boomers have more of a buy now, pay later mentality when it comes to dealing with money. Their families may have been traditional, but also could have been disintegrated. To receive an education for the boomers was a birthright, and they are very optimistic and value involvement. Their communication style is to call anytime, and they experience the first touch-tone phones. Our Generation Xers, on the other hand, lived through the first cell phones and likely came of age when the internet was first launched. They are very conservative typically and cautious when it comes to dealing with money. Education for the Gen Xers was viewed as a way to get there, and many were labeled latchkey kids as they experienced families with 2 working parents. They definitely value fun, but are skeptical when it comes to their core values. The Millennials, or Generation Yers, value extreme fun, and they're very social and typically confident. They experience merged or blended families and view education as a great expense. They have seen a great deal of evolution relative to technology and media avenues than any other generation, with the internet, picture phones, and instant messaging, to name a few. This generation is also known to earn more money to then spend it, from what we've seen thus far. We will further discuss 5 workplace characteristics for each generation: leadership style, interactive style, feedback and rewards, messages that motivate, and work and family life. Let's start this time with the Millennials. Work is a means to an end for the Millennials, and they thrive on a participative style of interaction. While their leadership style is still to be determined, we know they are going to communicate through technology. They like immediate feedback and strive to experience meaningful work. Messages that will motivate them include, you will work with other bright and creative people. They also enjoy work and life balance. Our Generation Xers arguably invented the term work-life balance. They typically thrive on a difficult challenge at work, however. They prefer an entrepreneurial type of work environment where everyone is the same and they can challenge others if they are the leader or manager. They also like to ask why questions, ensuring they are doing things efficiently. They prefer direct and immediate feedback along with autonomy or freedom to do their jobs. Messages that may motivate them include, do it your way, or forget the rules and present to me the end result. The baby boomers view work as an exciting adventure, and their leadership style may sometimes be consensual or collegial. Again, they love working in teams and scheduling meetings for one-on-one interaction and in-person communication. From a feedback and award standpoint, boomers enjoy having a nice job title and, of course, monetary rewards. Messages that motivate boomers include, you are valued and you are needed. They do work to live and don't necessarily live by the work-life balance concept. Traditionalists view work as an obligation, and their leadership style is directive and they may command and control. A formal memo or more formal communication style is appreciated. And when it comes to feedback and rewards, no news is usually good news to them, and they achieve satisfaction in a job well done. A message that will motivate them is, your experience is respected. They will also potentially frown upon or perceive that generations that value work-life balance just don't want to work as much.
So our attempt is not to label folks, but did folks see some generalizations that could be helpful in applying those to groups? Yes, no? Okay, cool. So as we look at the workforce, what we recognize that currently in the workforce, baby boomers are 24%. The Gen Xers are 20%, millennials are 27%. The generation at or the Nexers, no one's defined kind of what that group is about 20%. And so if we look at the workforce, we've got almost a 50% split. We have 44% of kind of traditional kind of workplace cultures, and then we have 47% of folks who are this kind of new way of doing business, and the Xers being the bridge, and then traditionalists are slowly kind of matriculating out of the workforce. And so what do these numbers suggest to us? What kinds of things should we be paying attention to when, as a supervisor? What kinds of things should I be paying attention to given this information and the prior slide as well?
Millennials and Nexters are the future of the organization.
Okay, so they're the future of the organization.
How people work best. If they work collegially or work on teams, then put them on teams.
Okay.
Make them, give them the environment that they thrive in.
Okay, so give people the environment that they thrive in. What else does this suggest? Yes?
Knowing what generation somebody's from helps you meet them where they're at. Like I run into callers versus emailers or people who operate in different ways, and if you want to speak more closely to them, it helps to meet them where they're at.
All right. So oftentimes people come to me for private consultations when they have been bad actors. And so this guy came to me and we were working on some stuff, and he said, I want you to meet my manager. And so so he set this up. And so he and I have been working through a learning management system. So I've been coaching him through this learning management system. But he said, if you want to get through to my manager, you need to call him. I was like, I can't send him an email? He's like, you can send him an email, but if you want to get through to him, you need to call him. So guess what I did? I like email. But I called him, right? So to me, what this suggests is, as we look at, as these folks are managers and supervisors, they need to be mindful of what these folks need. And as these folks are managers and supervisors, what was the book? I was just reading a book that said that the leader is not important. The first follower is. What is a leader with no one that will follow? Alone. Right? So the first follower is important. And so if I'm a leader, if I'm a Nexer or a millennial, and I have a certain way that I like interacting with the world, but I can't get anybody to work with me, then it does me no good to be a leader with that style if I can't get people to follow me or work with me, right? And so, all of these groups, it's important to recognize what the other groups need. And so, if I'm going to be effective, I have to understand what those other groups need, what their needs are. Now, I want you to key in on what I suggested. I said effective. How does that differ from like? Is there a difference between those two? Right? No. So I have a personal preference that may not necessarily be effective. So what determines if something is effective or not? What's the determination? How do we determine if something's effective or not?
Gets results.
It gets results based on
Your goals.
goals. So if I'm not keeping the goal in mind, then I can get twisted and get subjective thinking, which may lead us to ineffective behaviors. But we'll talk about that in just a second too. This is just more stuff about context is everything. So, someone in the skills required on a ranch in Montana are different than the skills required in Manhattan. So the cultures are different based on the context. We'll just get through that. Oh, I did want to talk a little bit about this picture. I picked this picture because I was like, this is so telling. This is so telling. What does this picture say, or what messages are coming across through this picture? Yes.
It's not only use of technology and the value they put upon it by how open the screens are, but also the fact that the sandwich generation is looking towards the elder, and maybe she's a caregiver. The youngest is looking out because she is maybe focusing on her path. And
Yeah, no, those are great observations. Other observations. What story does this tell, or could this tell? Yes, sir.
She is holding on to her asset.
Yeah.
Like she is not letting go.
All right, then she's not letting go.
Whatever it is.
Whatever it is, right? What else? Anybody notice the shoes? It's the same one that's on your the cover of your handout. It's the same picture that's the cover of your handout. Can you see her shoes there?
Flip-flops and sneakers and.
How many of our employees want to come to work in flip-flops? It was so funny. In Anoka County, we had a whole division meeting with all the division heads to talk about flip-flops.
oh my gosh.
Which ones were appropriate, which ones weren't, is it a heel, is it and if the building was set on fire, which ones could you run in if you needed to run in the building, safety concerns, all that kind of stuff. And so I think this is a very interesting, very telling, story about generations. I mean, even looking at clothing, right? Wearing a sweater versus something that's more fashionable versus something that's more practical, and so you can see at least I was able to see all these things in this particular picture, and I think it demonstrates very well that context is everything. So. So there's more stuff about that. Just real quick, traditionalists, out of their context, born between 1925 and 1945, 49 million people, grew up with many of the rules and pressures to conform. So traditionalists were forced to conform, increase prosperity over their lifetime. However, they do remember the Depression. Work is first, hard work ethic. Children should be seen and not heard, expected lifetime career with one employer. I'm a company man, right? Preferred communication style is writing, desire to leave a lasting legacy, hence the ability to have life insurance policies, right? And the willingness to have life insurance policies. Traditionalist values, hard work, dedication, sacrifice, respect for rules, duty before pleasure, honor, conformity, loyalty, being frugal. Some of the other contextual pieces, the Great Depression, the New Deal, attack on Pearl Harbor, World War II, Korean War, the radio as a technology device, as well as the telephone, be it either individual lines or party lines. The baby boomers, between 1946 and 1964, 79 million of them grew up with fewer rules or in a more nurturing environment. And why is that? Because their parents came from a more rigid and harsh growing up. They lived generally prosperous times, but experienced some layoffs. Women entered into the workforce in record numbers. People live to work. Spend quality time with children is important. Excelling in their career was important. Preferred telephone or face-to-face communication, and desired challenge and opportunity. We'll skip that. Generation X context, 1965, 1981, 49 million, grew up in latchkey or daycare because where were moms? Working. They were working, right? So, and latchkey, the idea, shoestring and a key to get in the house, right? Turbulent economic time, downturns in the 80s and 90s. The 90s upswing, live to work. It was funny, in the 80s, my dad was laid off from National Cash Register, and the job that he had in the 80s was a census taker. So the 80s were a tough time. Jimmy Carter, oil embargoes, long lines at the pump, lots of prices, small vehicles, right? So the K car, Chrysler K car, anybody remember? Okay. Friends and family of child, blah, blah, blah. Generation X values, diversity, technology, literacy, fun, self-reliance, pragmatism, being a realist, results-oriented, individualism, and they challenge the system. Other contextual pieces is the fall of the Berlin Wall, which is interesting when we're trying to build one between Mexico. The Challenger disaster, Desert Storm, the war, Desert Storm, personal computers, working mothers, MTV, divorce, and the energy crisis. And then lastly, are the millennials born 1982 to 2000, attended daycare, very involved helicopter parents. And why helicopter parents? Why are parents so involved?
Because their parents weren't.
Because their grandparents weren't, right? And so now we have helicopter parents who want to attend to every detail of their kid because they felt that they missed something by moms and dads both being at work. Do you see some of the residual outcomes of previous generations showing up in current day? Prosperity has increased over their lifetime. They live, then they work. So work is secondary. It's a means to an end. They're achievement oriented, prefer instant or text messaging, want to build parallel careers, experts in multitasking. And parallel careers meaning I'm doing this while I'm also doing this, and we'll see where it goes. Right? So like I said, these other slides are just dealing with more things that, that you can explore on your own. So for the sake of time, we want to explore those. So we talked a little bit about these concepts. So traditionalists, they like to be polite, respectful, reserved, obedient, and they're conformers. The boomers in the workplace are uncomfortable with conflict. They're consensus building. They have a consensus building style of leadership. They're formal. They like to follow protocol. They are social. They're politically sensitive. And what that means is politically sensitive is that we're aware of what's going on, but we also know that we probably shouldn't talk about it because people might disagree with how we think about those particular things. And they're idealistic. Generation Xers in the workplace are fast-paced. They like to be independent. They're typically confident, even if that confidence isn't supported by anything. Right? So they value personal time, and the interesting thing about us as Xers is that you'll hear people say that I need to take a personal day. I need a personal day today because I just need to get myself together and get centered because, right? They challenge the status quo, so that goes back to that point of asking why, because I don't want to just do something. I want to know why I'm doing it, because if I know why I'm doing it, maybe I can do it differently or better, even if I don't have evidence of that. I'll at least like to try. And loyalty, their relationship to the leader is important, because we can't trust organizations, but we can trust people, is what Generation X says. Because our boomer folks were betrayed by their organizations, right? So pensions and layoffs and overseas jobs, and Generation X saw that and said, you know what, I'm not having loyalty to the company, I will have loyalty to the leader, to the person. And then lastly, millennials in the workplace are task-oriented. They want options and choices. They expect attention. They expect feedback, multitasking through media. Where do these first 4 pieces come from? They come from everybody getting a certificate for participation. Right? Everybody got a certificate, whether you were good or bad, you got a certificate. Multitasking through multimedia, they think digitally, they work towards weekends or closing time. They are impatient, and they want to be led, but they want you to lead them in a particular kind of way. And usually it's using these other tools. So we talked a little bit earlier about strengths and weaknesses. I slipped over that slide, but I think Ben made reference to that early in our session, that there are strengths and weaknesses to those particular, for each of these generations. So job strengths, traditionalists are pretty stable. If they say they're going to do something, you can set your clock to it that it's going to be done in the time that they said that they were going to do. For boomers, they're very service oriented and they're team players. So you say, let's do this as a team, and you can count on the fact that that will get done. For Xers, they're adaptable and they're techno-literate, so there can be the go-between for folks. And you can say, well, what if they, boomers can say, what is that? And the Xers say, well, this is what it is, right? Millennial, and the millennials say, yeah, that's exactly what it is. And so they can do that. Millennials are multitaskers and they're techno-savvy. Now, the interesting thing about this techno-savvy thing, we also have to remember that there's a difference between using technology and creating technology. One of the things that I have found is that oftentimes my students who grew up with technology know how to use it, but can't necessarily produce anything with technology. So that's a nuance that we have to kind of talk about. So there's some other things in this chart that we'll go through a little bit later. Any questions, comments, observations? Yes?
How does a person's stage in life intersect with their generation? Where I have lots of friends right now that are having their babies, and then my mom has her grandchildren and retiring. And so although they're both products of their generation, I find that their focus and their goals are specific to what they are doing in life, whereas I don't have children, and so I'm different from somebody in my own generation.
Yeah, it goes back to the function as it relates to the context, right? So, you know, I'm 45, I'm not turning up. Because my context is different, right? The things that I need to, that are required of me are different given the context that I'm in, right? But I know what turn up is, right? So yeah, that stage of life obviously plays into that because it creates a different kind of context. And we might even refer to those as subcontexts, right? Or subcultures, as some anthropologists have often used. So, okay, so let's get to this other stuff. So, on-the-job challenges. So as a manager, I'm a traditionalist, and I'm a boomer, and I generally do not like questions or people challenging my authority. But I'm supervising Xers who've been taught to speak up. What challenges might present, what difficulties might arise with folks operating from this dominant paradigm as a manager? What conflicts might arise?
Their speaking up may be felt as a challenge to you.
So you may take that as a challenge to you as a manager. What else? What other challenges might arise? I don't like being questioned, but I got people always asking me questions, questioning my decisions, my authority, or it feels like they're questioning my authority.
Your communication styles might be different.
So the communication styles might be different. What else? What do I need to keep in mind?
Well, that manager may feel that it's disrespectful, but the employer, the Gen Xer, feels that it's their duty to question.
Yeah, right? So how do I know if, so what considerations should the manager make about the Xers or the millennials that they're supervising? What considerations could they make or should they be making?
It's not personal.
That is not personal. That maybe is not personal. No, in some cases it could be personal because we all have that one employee who wants to be us, but they don't want to do what we did to get to where we are, right? But maybe it's not personal, right? What other considerations?
You need to build in time to allow for questions and work.
Yeah, facilitate the opportunity for people to ask questions. Set the ground rules that we will be respectful when we ask these questions. Because there is a difference between asking a question out of sincerity and wanting to know, and then asking a question because you want to embarrass someone. And I mean, we've all experienced that, right? So setting up the ground rules might be important. So let's flip it. I'm an Xer. I've been taught to speak up. I ask these traditionalists to give me their opinions, and they say, you're the boss. What do you think? What might be some things we might need to do or think or as people have been taught to speak up?
I would feel that the traditionalist or boomer was not involved or caring about the situation because they're not actively participating in creating a solution.
Right, so that might be some of those, and it's funny we keep saying feeling. Has anyone ever heard that? Did people pick that up? I might feel this way. I'm going to talk about feelings in just a second. What else might be some considerations one might need to have working with traditionalists? Yes.
Like how to ask the question of the individuals to draw out the feedback? Maybe it's the way you're proposing the question that they're not giving you feedback, but if you draw out some of those ideas on how they, we need you and you're the, you've been here, give us your experience and feed off of what they know, then more than likely they'll be able to give you feedback.
Right. So this has been the secret to my success in life, because I am hugely successful, as you can see. Right. So this is what I learned. So as a high school teacher, I'd always have somebody sit in the back of the classroom who wanted to distract from the lesson I was giving. And some people would suggest that you need to be in a power struggle. Anyone have heard of that idea, that concept of power struggle? Right? Yeah. So I could be in a power struggle with them, where I say, Jeffrey, put all your things on the floor, or and then I go back to the board, and then Jeffrey's still acting a fool back there, right? So that's one way that teachers deal with that so-called power struggle. I never had power struggles in my classroom because I had all the power. I wasn't an egomaniac or anything like that, but all the rules were on my side and not necessarily on the student side. But I needed to be smarter than that, because I can't beat up every bully and I can't kick out every bad kid in my class, because that means I'm the bad teacher. And so the kid would be in the back, and what does a kid want who keeps disrupting the classroom? Talking, being off topic, what do they want? They want attention. They want attention. And this is sometimes where, as supervisors and managers, we get confused because we say, I'm going to ignore that behavior. But what happens in my classroom if I ignore that behavior? It gets worse. So I learned this teaching. Give people what they want, but not necessarily in the way that they expected. So I gave Jeffrey, my bad student in the back of the class, attention, but not the way he expected it. So if millennials or Xers need a particular thing, it's okay as a manager to make sure that they get it. But they might not get it the way they expected. So I tell Jeffrey, come here for a second. Jeffrey, I want you to pass out these papers. Oh, Jeffrey, every morning I want you to take attendance for me. And since you're taking attendance for me and you're passing out the papers, you can't sit in the back. You have to sit right here next to me. You get the special assistant's chair. What started happening with Jeffrey's behavior in my class? What happened to his behavior? It improved. I gave him a purpose. I gave him what he wanted. Was attention. And the other kids looked at him as a leader, so now I have their leader working for me, which now empowers me, because now we're working together. So give people what they want. It's okay. They just might not get it the way they expected. So the Xers, use the traditionalists. Use their expertise, their talent, their gifts. Respect them. Make them a head of a committee. Not some arbitrary thing, but something that is authentic. Right? So on the job challenges, traditionalists and boomers. So traditionalists and boomers prefer face-to-face communication. Boomers, as bosses, like to have at least one meeting a week with their employees, right? So boomers and traditionalists like having meetings. What's the problem when it comes to Xers? Xers are like, really? We gotta have enough? Didn't we just have a meeting last week? What's the agenda? Are we gonna have a meeting to have a meeting? You know, and that kind of stuff. So when the traditionalist is a manager and they prefer to have meetings each week, the Xers prefer electronic communications and they don't like meetings, and may have to develop, listening skills because, I'm ready to move on. I'm going to fall asleep in this meeting, or I need to text somebody or look at my email while I'm in this meeting, right? As a manager, what should the traditionalists understand?
That they have short attention span.
that folks may have short attention spans. What else?
Meetings are not how they engage.
Meetings are not how they're engaged. So what should the manager be asking themselves? Remember, a leader with no followers is alone. So what should the manager be asking themselves?
How do you engage them without sitting them down to a weekly meeting? So
Learn to text.
Learn to text.
Get more one-on-one, stop them by their cube or whatever, checking in with them that way.
Do we need to meet weekly? Is what the manager should be asking themselves, right? How necessary is this, or is this just a tradition that we've done this thing this way? How necessary it is. And conversely, right? So if the opposite is true, that the Xers prefer electronic communications and they don't like meetings, and they have not necessarily developed listening skills, but the traditionalists that they're leading like having monthly meetings, because what's the traditionalist going to start saying about the Xer? They don't know how to do their job. They don't know how to be an effective manager. We're supposed to have meetings every week. We never have a meeting. What's wrong with them? They're incompetent. How do they hire somebody who doesn't have a meeting every week? So then what does the Xer need to ask themselves, or the millennial need to ask themselves as a supervisor?
How many meetings should we have?
How many meetings should we have? Are there times that we have to get together and talk about these things? Because to be quite honest, email is not the best way of communicating your thoughts and feelings to people. Anyone ever been misunderstood on Facebook? I was like, that's not what I'm... Well, you put an exclamation point on that. Why are you yelling at me? It's in all caps. I'm sorry, the cap button was stuck when I was typing it. Right? So there's that.
is it more important that the goal is what's more important? Versus having meetings, not having meetings, whatever.
Will you stop taking my slides? So let's go to your handout. Let's go to your handout. And I don't know why I keep losing handouts. So for those of you who don't know, I just want to tell you, you are the man. The man. The man. The one. The man. Because we are government, right? So what's our first goal? So when we look at this, the second page in your handout, the preamble to the Constitution. We, the people of the United States, in order to form a more perfect union, establish justice, ensure domestic tranquility, provide for the common defense, promote the general welfare of securing blessings of liberty to ourselves and our posterity, to ordain and establish this Constitution of the United States of America. Declaration of Independence, paragraph 2. We hold these truths to be self-evident that all men are created equal, that they are endowed by their Creator with certain inalienable rights, that among these are right, life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. Woo! I love those words. Love them. Because that's us. Everything that we're supposed to do is secure these things for people. So when people are in line to get a birth certificate or pay their property taxes, every interaction I'm supposed to have with them is supposed to ensure this. We're the man! Right? But there have been some failings, right? So these are some great words, but there have been some failings. 1863, the Emancipation Proclamation was signed, giving freedom to the people in the system of slavery. 1920, August 18th, the 19th Amendment to the Constitution is signed, giving women the right to vote because they did not have it previously. 1924, the Polk Act is signed, P-O-L-K Act is signed, making American Indians citizens of the United States. Pause for the irony. 1964 Civil Rights Act is signed, doing what for who? Giving civil rights to everyone. As these demographic shifts occur, the people who are fighting civil rights are going to be the people who need civil rights. Okay, moving on. 1978, the American Freedom of Religion Act is signed, giving American Indians the right to practice their religious beliefs without any prosecution. 1978. 1990, Americans with Disabilities Act is signed, doing what for whom?
Disability rights.
Disability rights. Please raise your hand if you plan on getting old. The ADA is for you. So those are some things that that's what we should be focused on, right? Giving these liberties. So we could also add DOMA in here. We could also talk about some of the current struggles that we're having around, and conversations we're having around how we interact with the criminal justice system, what that looks like, and all that kind of stuff. So these are ongoing things. So if you turn to the next page, I'm going to talk a little bit about the 4 truths about human beings. So there are 4 truths. First is that people can learn, change, and grow, even when we don't see evidence of it. There are lots of behaviors that I had as a young person that my parents were like, I hope he grows out of this, because they didn't see any evidence of it. We also know that people do what they think works, even when what? Even when it doesn't work. And why do people believe that it works? Even when it doesn't work, why do they still do it? Because it works at one time. It was effective at one time. So, why do people come up to the counter to get services and they're angry or upset and they start yelling at people? Why do they do that? Because it's worked in the past. But what you need to say to them is, bye, Felicia. So anybody get? No, Ice Cube. Yeah, Ice Cube. Bye. That's what the kids are saying now. It's hip. It's hip. So if you want to be hip, say it. Tell me how it works out. So all human behavior is goal-directed. I believe that all human beings are going after something through their behaviors. They're going after something with their behaviors. That we can look at their behavior and ask ourselves, what is it that they're going for? And I'll share with you what I believe that it is. And lastly, attitude is the reaction to a goal. How many people have dealt with someone else's attitude? Had to deal with somebody else's attitude. How many people had to deal with your attitude? Right? So what is an attitude? So we've all experienced an attitude. We've interacted with someone else's attitude, or someone's interacted with our attitude. How would one define an attitude? What's an attitude?
A response to a given situation.
It's a response to a given situation. Attitude. What did adults tell you about your attitude? That it was bad, or that you should change it, right? Yeah. So my dad was my pastor. So growing up, we went to church on Sunday from 7:30 a.m. to 11:30 p.m. We stop at 3 o'clock for chicken, not because we're black, but because chicken is delicious. So church all day Sunday. Friday night, I asked my dad for the car. My dad loves me. What does he say? He says, yes, he loves me. So I get the keys to the car. I'm hanging out with my friends. We're cruising for girls. I don't know what would have happened had we found girls, but we're cruising for girls. I come home before curfew, fill the car with gas, give my dad the keys, and he says I have what kind of an attitude? A good attitude, a positive attitude. And my father has the same. Sunday, my best friend Dexter calls me at noon and says, Andre, can you pick me up for the movies? What do I know about Sunday? Church. All day. But I'm 17. I'm invincible. And Jesus is my friend. So I go to my dad and I say, Dad, can I borrow the car? What does my dad say? He says no. As a matter of fact, not only does he say no, but he gives me the hell sermon. See, in our household, the worst consequence you could get for anything was going to hell. And either you could go to hell on your own or my dad would show you the way. As a result of that, I would say my dad had a bad attitude, and conversely, he would say the same about mine. So what is it that determines an attitude? The goal. Think about a young person you have in your life, and when you say yes to their requests, and then think about when you say no. Attitude. Now, as managers and supervisors, particularly when we have subordinates with attitudes, their attitudes are to distract us away from something very interesting. What are they trying to distract us away from? The goal. And I refer to it as the gorilla dance because I see it all the time with high school students, and I've seen it in the workplace as well. So you have two kids who want to fight each other. They want to fight. And so you have one kid across the hall over there and one kid over here. I'm going to get you! And the other one's like, and your mama! Right? Because that's how you get fights started, at least in the 80s. You say, my mama, what? So but they're way over there and they're shouting, but what are they not doing? They're not fighting, and they're not getting closer together. And then a crowd forms. And now the crowd is like, yeah, get her, hit her. And so now they're like, oh, okay, I'm going to get you. And then, so all this stuff is happening, and then the adults come out. And what happens when the adults come out? They go crazy. They're like, okay. Why? Because they know the adults will keep them safe. So they're doing this dance. I refer to it as a gorilla dance because two 500-pound gorillas do not want to what? They don't want to fight. So the one that makes the most noise scares the other one away. And so oftentimes our employees give us attitudes because they want to scare us away from the fact that they're not accomplishing the goal. So if they pay attention to this, then they don't pay attention to this. I was a master of that as a kid. My dad would say, so we had one rule, we had a number of rules, but because my parents went to old school, we had a set of rules that I had to pay attention to. And one of those rules was no talking back. If I tell you something, you don't talk back, you do it. So I remember I was playing Atari 2600 Contra. That was my favorite game. And so I'm in there. My dad said, Andre, go take out the trash. I said, in a minute. What did I do? I talked back. And what did my dad do? Boy. I was like, Dad, why do I always got to take out the trash? He was like, boy, don't you know you don't talk back in this house? And I'm the do your word. I'm like, cool, I won. I thought as a kid, because I didn't want it, have to take out the trash. But then my parents got hip. And my dad would say, Andre, take out the trash. Why do I have to take out the trash? Andre, take out the trash. There's other kids in this house. How come they don't have to take out the trash? Andre, take out the trash. I'm always the one taking out the trash, right? So what was my father not doing? He wasn't getting hooked in. He wasn't engaging in my what I would call foolishness. Because he had a goal in mind and he kept me focused on the goal. And so what is the goal of all human behavior? I would suggest that the goal of all human behavior is safety, significance, and belonging. If people are looking for safety, significance, and belonging, why do people come to work every day? Safety, significance, and belonging. Why do they immigrate to this country? Safety, significance, and belonging. Why do they pay taxes? Safety, significance, and belonging. Join the military. Safety, significance, and belonging. Join gangs. Safety, significance, and belonging. Take intravenous drugs. Safety, significance, and belonging. Looking for those things. So this is the thing that I think is really powerful for managers and supervisors. If I know what people want, what?
Help them get it.
I can help them get it. It's easy to help them get it if I know what they want. And I would suggest that most employees are in a state where they don't feel that like one of these things is getting met. And if you make one of these things, you have a friend for life. You have a friend for life. Just think about your close confidants. Do they provide one of those three things for you? My argument would be probably yes. If not, at least two of them, all three, that they provide you with those things in your relationship with them. So we're going to talk a little bit about these clash points as managers and supervisors. So a clash point in terms of getting along with traditionalists. So honor the chain of command. The traditionalists believe that there is a reason, even if I don't understand, and I don't have to even know it, but there's a reason that we have a procedure the way that it is, right? So honor the chain of command. Value the legacy that they've built, right? So I've been here for 40 years. I might actually know something over those 40 years. My mother would always say that kind of stuff to me. You know what, Andre? I know you have a college degree, but I actually might know something, right? And she has a way. She's got a master's degree too, but appreciate their dedication, communicate one-on-one, and learn the corporate history. Getting along with boomers, show respect, choose face-to-face conversations whenever possible, give people your full attention. One of the things that I've learned about boomers is that if I'm actually trying to have authentic communications, doing anything else seems like a sign of disrespect to them. But if I know that, then I can what? Give them what they want. If I want to be effective. So give people your full attention, learn corporate history, getting along with Xers, get to the point, use email, give them space, get over the notion of dues paying. Like a lot of Xers, we're anti-hazing. Sometimes we do that in organizations. You got to do all these steps before you can get to that thing. No, am I competent? Am I, do I qualify? Okay, if so, yeah, then put me. Why do I have to go through all of this hazing, corporate hazing? And listen up. Lastly, getting along with millennials, challenge them, ask their opinion, collaborate. Collaborate is different than compromise. Compromise is the devil. In every compromise, there's a seed of resentment. Compromise is never, ever anything you want to do. Because compromise says, I gave up something, you gave up something. And as long as we both think that it's equal, it's cool. But if I think that I gave up more than you gave up, we got a problem. Divorce. Encourage finding a mentor, provide timely feedback, and lighten up. So recognize that Generation Xers sometimes just think that a job is just a job, right? Or that an opportunity is just an opportunity. So let's work through some of these. So you have to forgive me, I didn't put enough commas in there, but at any rate. So Brian Young is an energetic Xer. He's a bright manager and likes to use the computer exclusively. Right? So that's how he communicates, that's how he does his presentations. When displaying content on a large screen in meeting rooms, he sometimes flips back and forth between his personal information and the relevant PowerPoint content. So sometimes, he's flipping through. So if Brian is the manager, what difficulties might arise as he's working with the different generations? So what problems might come from the traditionalists given Brian's style? given that he's flipping back and forth, he's looking at email stuff, it's showing up on the screen. What's that?
Showing on the big screen.
On the big screen.
Well, that's unprofessional.
Okay.
I mean, I just think that that's totally unprofessional. If you're in charge of a meeting and you're trying to give a presentation and you can't even focus yourself well enough to stay on task and on point, how do you expect your whole room full of people to stay with you?
So it could be perceived as being unprofessional. All right. What else? As we look at what each of these styles represent. So what would a Gen Xer say about that in the same meeting?
Maybe he has a kid in the hospital and he's worried about it. I don't know. I mean, it's context, right? And you don't know.
So it's context. So what might a Gen Xer? So given the same scenario, given what we know about Gen Xers, what might a millennial? What might a millennial say about that?
Maybe Googling on their phone looking for more information.
Okay, so they might be Googling on their phone while he's flipping through emails.
Because we're both multitasking.
Because they're both multitasking. They might not see it as a big deal. What's that?
No one's paying attention, so why be in the first place?
But it's a meeting, nobody pays attention.
No. This is.
The millennial crowd has this presentation up on their own laptop and isn't even paying attention to what's on the screen. Everyone's following along the same agenda in their own way. So that's how millennials.
So, given what you said, that nobody's paying attention. So, how do we know what is paying attention? How do we define that?
Engaging with the presenter.
So I'm engaging with the presenters, but who measures it? How does that get measured? Right? So at the end of the day, and this is the part where the Xers and the millennials get really frustrated with the boomers and the traditionalists, because the boomers and traditionalists believe. So all four of these believe the same thing, that we need to get to the goal. The boomers and the traditionalists believe that the process gets us to the goal. The Xers and the millennials believe that whatever we need to do, we just need to get to the goal, right? And so when we talk about, because I used to get hung up because I was raised in a real traditional educational environment where the teacher stands, and it's actually quite uncomfortable for me to have you guys just like out there doing your thing as I've grown. But the teacher stands here, and you sit in your chairs nicely, and you're quiet, and I give my information, and then I give you a test, and then we leave. But the real world is such that it doesn't. I'll just flip this and say, at the end of the day, what matters is if we're accomplishing those goals or not. How I think about your learning style, what I feel about this, that, or the other thing is irrelevant to the goals. Because I can feel good about what you're doing and still not have the goals met. Right? So we'll come back to a couple. Well, no, let's go. We'll do a couple more. So Brenda Jones, a millennial, she's new to her position. She makes changes to a few procedures. She sees a simpler way of conducting business. She's been given the authority to make the change without checking with anybody. However, staff has information that could be taken into consideration to avoid negative consequences resulting in over or underpayments to customers. So staff might know this. Brenda has the ability to make the decision without asking anyone. What kinds of things should Brenda, if she wants to be effective, and what is defining our effectiveness? The goal, right? So what is defining? What might Brenda want to take into consideration?
Corporate history.
So corporate history. What has happened before? Feedback from everyone, right? What good is a leader with no followers? Right? So those are some things that Brenda may want to to take into consideration, right? Is there a difference between having the right to do something and being right and doing something? Is there a difference between those two things? There certainly is, right? And so particularly when we talk about an organization that's very people-oriented and people service-centered, I may have the right to make unilateral decisions, but that may not necessarily be the right thing, particularly if I want people to follow me. Think about people who have been really motivators in your life, in your either personal or your career life. I would imagine that those have been people who have built things with you, as opposed to either just made you build them yourself or they did it themselves, right? That they built things with you. Jasmine is a seasoned traditionalist, and she's a director. Her experience as a manager suggests that employees should be able to get work done during work hours. She does not allow flexibility in scheduling or understands the need of telecommuting, right? So she sit at your desk for 40 hours, that's how we get things done. What things might she want to consider?
The technology has evolved and
That technology has evolved and it can actually be used as a tool for us. What else?
The different life situations of the people working for them.
So there may be different life situations for the people that are working for her. Can you sit at your desk for 40 hours and still get nothing done? Yeah, but you're sitting there. I was here. I didn't do anything, but I was here. Right? Yeah. So those are some things to consider. So Ryan is a younger administrative person. He overhears a manager complaining about the younger staff have short attention spans, that they like to multitask. They're used to instant gratification, and they don't take things seriously. What can Ryan say to the manager? What kinds of things can Ryan say to the manager?
A one-on-one meeting.
So he could set a one-on-one meeting.
Well, Ryan should just say for all the younger staff meeting their goals, because while you're here, they multitask if they're still getting the work done.
And don't forget, put it in that context.
Yeah. Especially talking to your manager, right? You get it, right? But ultimately, in all of these scenarios, what do we keep pointing back to? What keeps coming up as a conversation as we keep pointing back to? The goals. What are the goals? What are the goals? What are the goals? And so the other thing about that is you have to have conversations about what, as a manager, wherever you are on the spectrum or this type, what are you comfortable with that will allow you to be comfortable as a manager or supervisor to get to the goals? And then also have a conversation about the people who you're working with or are in collaboration with. What do they need to help reach the goal? The goal becomes the central focus of everything that we do. Otherwise, we have off-purpose behavior, right? Off-purpose behavior. And there are some ways in which we kind of talk about some things that kind of convolute our ability to have authentic did that, we'll skip that, did that. So first and foremost, as a manager or supervisor, you have a different responsibility than anyone else in the organization. One is that your responsibility is to have high regard for the people that you work with, which is a bit different than respect, but manifests itself as respect. So as a supervisor or manager, you are to be respectful at all costs because you are the arms and legs of the organization. You represent the body of the organization. Other people can be the face, but you are the working organs of the organization. And if you are disrespectful, if the internal organs are dysfunctional or aren't cooperative, then the rest of the body is going to suffer. The face of the organization are those direct service line employees. So they need to be pleasant because when people have a bad experience at the license center, they don't say, you know, Brenda Thompson was mad. They say Dakota County sucks. Right? That's what they say. But we are the internal organs. And so we have to be respectful. We have to know what our role is as manager and supervisors. And my role is not to be your friend. Even though we used to be friends when we worked together, I can't be your friend and your supervisor. That work is about business. That we need to think and we need to stand up in the face of oppressive systems, inappropriate comments. As supervisors, we have to do that because those are the things that help us avoid harassment in general, sexual harassment in a more kind of specific way. And so respect, know your role, and work as business. One of the things that I often tell supervisors, because sometimes employees get caught up in this, is that I ask myself, in what context do I know you? Because context is everything. And so if we met at the job and we became friends at the job, even if we do stuff outside of the job, if I didn't work here, would we still be friends? Would we have been friends before? Would we be friends after? And however you answer that question, that determines the kinds of relationships you need to have with your employees and with each other. Context is everything. I was going to talk a little bit about this idea of microaggressions. We're at 11 or 11:30? 11:30? Okay, cool. So we'll have time to talk about that. So I'm walking down the hall, and another employee swats me on the butt and squeezes. And we're not on the softball team together. What do we call that? Sexual harassment. What happens? What's the next process? What happens next?
Gets reported to the supervisor.
Gets reported to a supervisor. Supervisor sends it to HR. HR does an investigation. HR comes up with its findings, gives whatever findings it has. If the employee is not satisfied with what HR does, they file a complaint with the State Human Rights Commission or the Civil Rights Division. They don't like that. They can take it to court. Lawyers get paid. So forth and so on, right? But what if in that process the person says, I was just joking. You can't take a joke. Does that have any bearing on the process? No, it has no bearing on the process. Why?
Because the rules.
Because it's still sexual harassment. The law looks at impact and not intent. The law looks at impact and not intent. However, has anyone here either given or received a macaroni sculpture? Anybody receive one or given one? Right. Where did that, once the giver presented that macaroni sculpture, where does the macaroni sculpture go? Where does it go?
Usually it's trash.
Where's the first place it goes? On the refrigerator, the place of honor for all fine art. Right? So why did the receiver receive the macaroni sculpture? Was it particularly interesting? I mean, was the texture interesting? Was the design particularly good? I mean, could you sell it on Etsy or eBay? Would you pin it on Pinterest? Probably not, but why was it received?
The intent behind the gift is why it's valued.
Because the value comes from the intention and not the impact. So when we talk about legal issues, we measure impact versus intent. But when we talk about human relations, we measure the intent over the impact. So I am more concerned when we talk about human relations, when people get along with each other, what is your intention in getting along with each other? I'm concerned about that as a manager and supervisor, because I already have something that will deal with the impact, but I need to work on your intentions, right? So when you when you have a worker that consistently comes late, you can harp on them about the rules, the impact. But it'd be real interesting if you had them think about the intention for the work group. So you came late. Did you intend that that Barbara would miss picking up her child because she had to wait for you on her shift? Was that your intention? Oh, no, that wasn't my intention. Oh, but that's what happens when you don't fulfill what other people. So was that in your intention, right? So there's that. So impact versus intent, and intent versus impact. I do a little piece on this idea of bigotry, prejudice, and discrimination. And what I'll just say and sum this up really quickly is that bigotry is an emotional state, and you can only change emotions with other emotions. Prejudice is a thought process, and you can only change thoughts by questioning those thoughts. And that discrimination is a behavior, and that emotions plus thoughts dictate our behaviors. And those things color or create the opportunity for microaggressions. Is anyone familiar with that term, microaggressions or micro inequalities, right? So aggression being what? Hostility, right? Or overzealous might be other words to describe that. And micro meaning small. Now, the interesting thing about that is that the label that is given is actually a misnomer. It's not quite named properly, but it's what we use to have conversations about it. Because they are these small things that happen, but they actually have quite a big and profound impact on people. So if I'm talking and you come to my office and I'm typing and I've invited you into my office and I continue typing, what am I saying to you by typing? Typing is not only more important than you, but you certainly aren't as important to me as whatever I was doing before you came in. Microaggression, particularly if you're trying to be a high performer. If you're trying to be effective. So there's this ratio that, so there is there are microaggressions, and they have a direct ratio with something referred to as discretionary effort. Yeah. Sorry, I have to double check. Direct 1-to-1 ratio. Direct. What is discretionary effort? What is discretionary? What does that mean? You have a choice. You have a choice to do something with your effort. So Dakota County, I work at a license center, and in my contract they say if you do X, Y, and Z, we will pay you. Right? That's what they say. Now, my supervisor would love it if I would give 100% of myself 100% of the time. Is there a supervisor that would love that from their employees or manager, right? You love your employees to do that. But will you pay them still if they do 75%? You will. So between 75% and 100% is up to their discretion. So if I'm experiencing microaggressions, if I'm feeling these negative impacts all the time, am I willing to give my 100%? Probably not. So there is a direct ratio. And I would suggest that the smaller the microaggressions or the micro inequities, the higher the discretionary effort. 1-to-1 ratio. So jokes in the workplace. I think it's interesting that I don't do ballet in the workplace. Why do you think I don't do ballet in the workplace?
You're not that good.
Yeah, I'm not good. Why else would I not do ballet in the workplace? It's not my job. Telling jokes at work is not my job. It's off-purpose behavior. Now, you can't see this picture really well, but it's a woman walking down the street, and there are all these guys who are kind of gawking at her. Are any of those guys doing anything that is illegal? No, they are not. When she gets to where she's going, do you think she'll be ready to give whatever that is 100% of her attention and her time and her life energy? We don't know for sure, but possibly not. I've never been Googled and Googled like that, although I would love to see what that feels like. But I would imagine that those are micro inequities. Nothing is illegal, but it's not building up her humanity. So microinequities or microaggressions are the small, disrespectful actions that on their own may seem slight, build on other situations that create the appearance of a hostile environment. Discretionary effort, the quality, time, and manner in which one chooses to give resources based on subjective rationale in order to fulfill a contract. So I'm going to do my contract, but I might not necessarily like it. Here are some other examples of specific micro-inequities, particularly around racial ideas. So particularly around race, people will ask things that are that separate or divide us. Like, for example, where are you from? Where were you born? Now, you know that there's a difference between just asking and asking, right? Oh, you speak good English. A person asking an Asian American to teach them words of their native language, right? The description of intelligence. You're a credit to your race. You're so articulate. Asking the Asian person to help them with math or a science project. Color blindness. And I always think this is funny. Color blindness. Because lots of people are like, well, we should be colorblind. Has anyone ever heard someone say that? We should be colorblind. What's problematic with that? What's that?
It's not recognizing your humanity, your difference.
It's not recognizing humanity or difference? What else?
You're just kind of glossing over history and context where they're from.
You're trying to ignore this. You're trying to erase this. Why are we called Dakota County? Context. And colorblindness, I think, is interesting because it's not genuine. You see color, you see differences, but that's not the problem. The problem isn't in seeing the differences or recognizing the differences. The problem is the values that you associate with the differences that you see. That this is a good difference, and that's a bad difference, and this should be that way, and this should be the other way. And so, as a manager or supervisor, I can't get caught up in these kinds of things, because ultimately, what am I shooting for? What am I shooting for as a manager or supervisor? Trying to make sure that we get to our goal, right? Trying to get to our goal. So if you go to we'll go to the back page first, and it didn't turn out this well either, so it looks about the same. In terms of being a quality manager or halfway decent manager, I like to use this metaphor of a shepherd. I like to use the metaphor of the shepherd. And what is the shepherd's job? What's the shepherd's job? It's on the back page, on the final back page of your thing. What's the shepherd's job? Tending the flock. Right? What else? To keep the sheep safe. What else? Safe from what? Being eaten by a wolf, right? Yes. So they protect the flock. They protect the industry. They protect their interests in the responsibility that they've been given. So as supervisors, our job is in some ways to be a shepherd over the resources, the people that we've been given accountability for. Right? And we're to protect them from the wolves. Now, one of the things that's really interesting is that sometimes in our flock of sheep, there are goats. What's the difference between a temperament of a goat and a sheep? So goats are smart, sheep are dumb, okay? So goats are stubborn and maladaptive, right? How do you know if you have a goat or a sheep in your flock?
You can't fleece a goat.
You can't fleece a goat? Oh, fleece. Oh. You can't fleece a goat. What do goats have that sheep don't? They have pointy horns and attitude. So as a shepherd, you have to be mindful of actually who's in your flock and be able to identify who's in your flock. One thing I will tell you is that goats like to fight. I haven't seen sheep fighting or bucking the system. They kind of go along with what's going on. And then every now and then you have that random sheep, because I've been a shepherd. I'm joking. I've never been a shepherd. And so outside of the flock, there are other flocks, right? So there could be goats there as well. Now, I find it interesting that the shepherd typically has a sheepdog. And I don't know this for sure, but I've heard that the sheepdog and the wolf have the same genus. They come from the same line. Have other people heard that? So what makes the difference between the sheepdog and the wolf? Loyalty to the shepherd, training. Who trains the sheepdog? The shepherd, right? The sheepdog has loyalty to the shepherd. Who trains the wolf? Oh, the wolves! And who are the wolves loyal to? To themselves, right? And so as a supervisor, sometimes, particularly when we come out of the flock as sheep, and when we become supervisors, the other sheep are saying, I remember when you were a sheep. Come and do what we do. But do shepherds do what sheep do? No, they don't. Why?
They have different set of responsibilities.
Because the responsibilities are totally different. They're changed. They're not the same creature. So sometimes, you know, and we get our feelings get engaged. And I would suggest, particularly given the goal-oriented nature of the responsibilities that we have, that our feelings become off-purpose behavior, which leads us to start saying really interesting things. For example, I have heard supervisors say, they said, where is it? Boom. We are a family. Anyone ever heard someone say that? You ever ask them what they meant by that? What do you mean we're a family? Because when most people talk about their families, they talk about the dysfunction first. Right? They talk about a family. How many people belong to a family? Anyone here belong to a family or a part of a family? Yeah. Yeah. Now this is interesting because families are designed for a particular thing, and they're designed to provide safety, significance, and belonging. And safety twice. Oops. Right? Teams are also designed to produce safety, significance, and belonging as well. Families are in the service of who? Themselves. Teams are in the service of who? Others. Right? Others. So, family. In terms of the goals of a family, the values vary. And I don't know if your family, and some families do this, but I don't know if your family did this. Did you guys have a mission statement in your home? No? Okay, you didn't have a mission statement in your home. Did anyone have, action plans in your home? No, you didn't have those things in your home. You didn't have lists, right? I'm sure. Yeah. Family, discretionary commitment. It's funny, there are people that I want to kick out of my family, but they still hang around, right? Yeah, how do you get rid of a family member? You don't, right? You can't move far away from them, right? Families are more independent. It's very much relationship-based. There's individual accountability, and there's a lot of personal return on investment. There's a lot of personal ROI. In terms of a team, they have a shared mission, which typically the family's mission is tucked inside the family. The team has an express mission that they're trying to work towards. There's collective responsibility. There's a strong commitment. There are common goals or tasks. There's shared leadership roles. There's individual and mutual accountability. There's a sense of equality, and everything that the team does is good for the team, for the good of the whole. And in our case, it would be the whole of society, right? So what I'd like for you to do is, in your handout, I'm getting better because I'm over 40, so I need to print things that I can see. So I'm getting better. So what I'd like you to do is I want you to take just a couple of minutes and look at these two lists, and I want you to put a F next to a statement that you think equates to a family, and a T next to a statement that you think equates with a team. All right, stop right where you are. I'd like for you to talk about those differences or how you see those, the strengths and weaknesses of families and teams. Just have those conversations at your table. What are the strengths and weaknesses of families versus teams, given our work context?
Family borrow money. That's a weakness. The goal is to get and keep as much as you can. No. Family members sleep on your couch.
Teams are probably more temporary. Change what team you're on.
So, you know what, I'll give you the folks that you either work with or
Teams brought together.
Why would you say or there's a hybrid. Is it tips one way or the other? hybrid. It's a hybrid. Where it's. Oh. Have at it. Have at it.
Yeah, more than one team.
Oh, right.
Come in the door and say good morning. And who does it, who doesn't, who doesn't do it. And why? Okay, I mean, so you. Coming under the same umbrella as so the formal is probably more so like
All right, thank you so much for a really good conversation. I know that that last set of questions was not necessarily as clear as folks would have liked, but I'm glad that you at least started having conversations about that. The point I wanted to make with that is to ask yourself if you're dealing with a family or a team, because the expectations of the members who are participating or acting in a particular kind of way are different, right? So if I don't get the shift that I like, so here's this is when you know you're working with a family. Here's a clue. I've been here for 10 years. I deserve the best shift. That's a family statement. Why is that a family statement? Why would a family member say something like that?
Because you can't get rid of them.
Because you can't get rid of them.
Because the oldest are always knows the most.
The oldest are always the ones who know the most. So you have a team that is functioning in their mind as a family. Now, I understand tenure and that kind of thing. I also think tenure can be problematic because you can have people who've been around a long time doing nothing. Right? But they're good at doing nothing. They've been doing it for 30 years. Right? So as a supervisor, you have to be mindful of that. So what am I doing that is either blah, blah, blah? And how do you know that what is the measurement for the effectiveness of your team?
Meeting the goals.
Meeting the goals, right? So we were talking in the back, there's a group where someone has need to take off time to take care of a family member, and so the rest of the team makes up for that, and they cover that, and blah, 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 and that is a team. Even though there's a lot of emotionally charged reasons why they're doing it, and it feels very family-like, it is still a team because they're achieving and accomplishing what? Goals. Because as the affirmative action officer, I found it very interesting that right around evaluation time, people would start filing discrimination complaints. Why would they do that before evaluations? To be a distraction for their lack of work because they weren't meeting the goals. Now there were some cases where it was legitimate and it just happened to fall around their stuff. But for the most part, too often that was the let me shoot first kind of thing. Right? So that's important. I didn't get a chance to get into this. I did want to talk about stages of team development. There's forming, norming, storming, performing, and adjourning. This idea of forming is that you lay the foundations of how you're going to work. So I would tell my employees, I am a Generation Xer, and there's certain things that I expect. So I will need you to help me help you. So tell me what you need, and we'll collaborate on something together. We'll collaborate on our meeting styles, our meeting schedules. One of the things that I always did was that I ran a flat meeting style organization where the role of the facilitator, the role of the recorder, the secretary, if you will, always rotated. So every person on the team had responsibility for what the team was doing. So then it moved from being my meeting, Andre's meeting, to being our meeting because we had a flat organization and everyone had a part to play in that organization. And we did the calendar like that. You're the recorder this meeting, you'll be the facilitator next meeting, so forth and so on. So we did that. Norming is saying this is how we'll work together. These are the rules that we're going to create for our staff. This is when we'll play. This is when we'll be serious. We'll meet at these times. Storming is learning how to deal with conflict. And when we talk about conflict is good. It's a part of life. We need to figure out ways to deal with that. So we'll either vote on things, or we'll do things by consensus, or there may be some things that I have to do unilaterally just because of my responsibility. But we'll talk about that. We'll go through that storming phase, and the hope is that storming stage gets us to a place where we're performing. Because ultimately, if we're not performing, everything else that we're doing is off purpose. If I can't make those numbers, if I can't engage the community in a way that is helpful, then everything that I'm doing is off purpose. And lastly, when we talk about this idea of team development, teams do have a definite end. And so I would suggest that particularly if you're working on long-term change, that you make sure you put those stopgaps in and say, this team with this configuration, we're going to work on this for this amount of time, and then we're going to move on to something else. Because things that are prolonged is really difficult to keep people motivated and engaged in that kind of process. So that idea of team development is extremely important. The last thing that I wanted to do in the 1 minute that I have was have the computer go out. So we're good. We're good. So there's that. Let me make sure I got through everything in the thing. Oh! So if you can go back to the middle of your handout, I did want to touch on this really quick. One of the things we want to do is avoid a hostile environment. And so what that means is I don't do ballet at work. So I don't tell off-color jokes at work because those things are offensive. And if you think about a Ole and Lena joke, and you substitute Ole and Lena for Jews, it takes on a different kind of thing. If you substitute Ole and Lena for Polacks, it takes on a different kind of feeling. You add black people or Mexicans, it takes on a whole different kind of thing, right? So that's inappropriate. Next is no sexual or gender-oriented jokes either, right? So those double entendres or the idioms that we use sometimes that mean two different things or could be a little bit dicey, we need to call people on those. Next is know that no offense is an offense, right? So people will say, they'll say something inappropriate, and oh, I didn't mean that, or no offense. No, that was offensive, and that's not appropriate for where we need to be in the workplace. Sometimes we'll say, well, that's just how Tom is, or that's just how, Susie is, and we tolerate that kind of behavior. But if it's inappropriate, off-purpose behavior, it's inappropriate for the workplace, and we need to call attention to that. I had to call, when I was at Anoka County, I had to have an uncomfortable conversation with the commissioner about how he was talking to the female administrative staff. Very uncomfortable. This is my supervisor's boss. This is an elected official appointed by the people, and I had to have those uncomfortable conversations around sexist remarks with the commissioner. So we have to say something. We have a responsibility. Because if I didn't say something to him about that, and the employee decided to sue, they had a case, right? And so that exposes us. So not saying something in the face of many of these things exposes us to more damages than actually addressing the problem. Know that number 6, that work is work. We're here to get something done. As much as we enjoy each other, that is a subsequence of the fact that we're working together. And then lastly, know that no means no. So if someone says, no, I don't want to participate in that activity, or no, that this isn't, for me, take that at face value, right? Take that at face value. Lastly, it's also important to recognize that our employees come with some interest. One part of it is self-interest and social interest, and those need to be balanced. So I need to make sure that their personal interests are engaged, but that those social interests are also balanced with the good of the working group. Know that people are experiencing inferiority and superiority complexes at the same time. People feel inadequate because they are. And sometimes we overcompensate and we feel superior in ways that aren't warranted. People operate with mistaken beliefs, so they can believe something is true, even and with given information, they can reform those ideas. We talked a little bit about overcompensation, and we also need to have cultural continuity in the sense that people are able to move between context and culture. And so as context requires change, that people are able to make those changes in how they adapt to that context. My name is Andre Cohen. I really appreciate your time. Thank you, thank you, thank you.
Thanks, Andre. As always, it's very valuable and packed full of information. So please, you're going to have a lot to think about, a lot to go back and reflect on and talk about and apply in the workplace. So again, thank you so much.
Thank you.
All right, you may not be aware that we're rolling, remember last year we were all required to take online diversity training? The same training is going to be rolled out to all employees countywide. Adriana is going to talk a bit about, remind us what some of the major points were from the training last year, and then I'll talk a bit about how we're going to roll it out in the division.
I don't have tons of stuff because I know we all want to wrap up, but can I just hand with everybody who's done the training? You've done it, can you just... Okay, so the majority of people, not everybody has. So if you haven't, the first thing to say is please go in and do that training.
And that would be new folks.
That would be new folks. Okay, all right, fantastic. I'm so new I haven't done reporting yet on who's participated. So those of you who have done it, you know that this training is an introduction. It's a very basic level of introducing diversity, inclusion, and cultural competence as keywords in the workplace. The thing that we want to do is take a blended learning style approach for this, because the danger when you just do an e-learning is that people read something on a screen, they do something on a screen, they never go away and have a conversation about how it's going to affect their working lives. So what we're going to be asking all of you to do as supervisors is to have a conversation with your teams about the training. I think there's two ways that you can do this, and Jean probably has an opinion of how you can do this. You can either do it before your employees go into the training and give them some prompts for what they're going to learn and have a conversation, or you can do it afterwards. And it's really up to you, and it's up to Jean, I think, as well, for how you want to do that. And there's benefits to both of those styles. The key things that you're going to want to talk about, and the way that I would approach it if I were you, is how does it impact your teams and what you do in your service centers or your departments. So you can go about that in whatever ways you want, whether it's talking about team working amongst your colleagues, whether it's how you interact with the public that you serve. It's going to have an impact probably on both of those things. But the key messages that you're going to want people to take away from the training are: what is diversity and how does it impact us here at Dakota County? What is inclusion and how do I make my team or my area more inclusive? And what is cultural competence in relation to Dakota County? So just as a little short 5-minute exercise, can you talk amongst your tables about how you're going to facilitate those discussions? And I'll try to just drop around really quickly. I'm thinking 5 minutes, and then I'll bring it back together and we can just share a little bit of what we talked about, okay? Let's
Well, this is kind of tough because she said we can tell us how we're going to have a conversation. And you don't have to say it. I'll review the diversity When we did last year, we didn't do remember just and now the staff have to do that as an easy to facilitate a conversation. But I don't remember all of that.
What day is this?
Yeah, so it's a small
Also, just having more candid conversation. What exists right now. And maybe they would want to say like public or things. Where they're at.
Oh, no, I think you were saying.
Also thinking, everything kind of context of what we just
Well, yeah, I mean,
You better be positive. You need to talk about technology. And now you-
Well, I think they kind of, those people that are, make sure that millennials who don't want to be in They don't have to vote.
and I see the videos, I mean, let's talk about
I'm confused about that because mitigation of microaggressions, they're saying how if I went to my office and I'm typing and everything, it's microaggressions.
well, if you don't stop.
Yeah, but isn't that, and we're doing the presentation, checking email, like anything else, is that a microaggression?
Yeah, probably.
But we're supposed to accept that, you know? I don't. Maybe.
And this will set together because I'm conscious of time. Thank you for those of you that tabled that let me participate in your discussions. Some of the